All right, so are you shooting raw or not? Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel here. Hope you're doing well. I just delivered a little workshop last night to the Battleford's Camera Club here in Saskatchewan. That was on editing and post-processing and all that wonderful stuff. I got to deliver a little bit of a sales pitch as usual about the benefits of shooting in RAW. And if you've been a photographer for a long time, or you're kind of, intermediate or advanced, you're saying, yeah, old news, Matt, welcome to 10, 15 years ago. Of course, shooting in RAW is always better, but definitely surprising to realize lots of shooters out there, or lots of, amateur and aspiring photographers are still letting their camera do all that hard work for them. And it's great to have that instant response. And a lot of times now we've got cameras like, the Fuji systems do all kinds of awesome film simulation modes and stuff like that. But sometimes it's worth kind of foregoing that convenience of having that quick fix and the awesome image right out of camera in JPEG to embrace the flexibility and adaptability you get to realize your vision if you're shooting in RAW. So, it might be a little bit old school, a little bit old news, but stick around. I'm going to present my top 6 reasons for shooting in RAW, and a couple of them I think are not expected, or at least are things that I didn't read about back in the day when I was getting the sales pitch about shooting in RAW. So let's just jump right into it. Mastering your camera, of course, is always important, and getting the best exposure possible in camera is always the objective. Saying that you're shooting in RAW doesn't mean that you're going to be lazy and forget about it. And it also doesn't have to mean, and I know for me this was kind of the sticking point back in the day too, it doesn't have to mean a huge, tremendous overload and additional work either. A lot of people might be in one camp or the other kind of thinking, well, if you're shooting RAW, then you're lazy, you're not worrying about your white balance, you're not worrying so much about your exposure, and you're just, shooting fast and easy out there. And on the other hand, people that really are just learning about RAW too, they might be thinking, geez, one more thing to worry about, one more step, one more process. I just want to get my pictures and share them, and JPEGs can be great for that. But definitely, if you're trying to realize a vision or maximize the creative potential of your images, RAW is 100% the way to go. So let's just jump in and look at some of the reasons here. Number 1, and the one that everybody I'm sure has heard about, is exposure. Yeah, you think about, well, a shot was underexposed or overexposed, and yeah, if you're shooting in RAW, you can fix that. Cameras have tended to get better and better over time, and definitely a newer camera now shooting in RAW is going to do better than a camera from 10 years ago shooting RAW. But I'll tell you right now that shooting a camera that's like 5 or 7 years old, you might think it's obsolete. I'll take that camera in RAW over a camera today in JPEG any day. The flexibility you're going to have after the fact and that control over your image and your exposure is going to be that much bigger. So exposure, the number 1, perhaps, most obvious thing there too. Number 2, let's talk about white balance. Cameras have gotten better and better, and with my Nikons, like my D500, my Z6, I've been really comfortable trusting the auto white balance to get it right, or at least 98% right. But when you're shooting RAW, you can always go in after the fact and make any type of adjustment you would like, and that lets you really warm up or cool down an image without degrading the image quality. And that's the important thing here too, is when you're shooting in JPEG, any of these changes you make, the image is so much more fragile, it's so much more baked in, it's so less flexible. So when you go to make those tweaks to things like white balance, there's only so much flexibility you have before the image starts looking like garbage. Alright, so those are the first 2, and maybe a little bit obvious when you're talking about overall exposure and overall white balance. Those are probably the things that come to mind first and foremost when you think about the benefits of shooting RAW. We're into uncharted territory here now, at least in terms of the original benefits that I was always hearing about. And first up, let's talk about saturation. That's right, when you're shooting RAW, you've got so much more control over the saturation of your images, and that's selective saturation too. So you can control, the warm tones, the cool tones, just the purples, just the greens, just the yellows, what you want to saturate or desaturate. And when you're shooting RAW, again, these images, just like they have that flexibility or stretchability with exposure and white balance, they have that same flexibility with saturation too. And so that's kind of like the color bit depth or the color dynamic range of your sensor, and you're not maximizing it, if you're just letting your camera make the decision and hand you that finished product. So definitely, color saturation is another huge benefit of shooting raw on the list, and it's not one of the things that I was hearing about, initially when you think about the benefits of shooting raw. Next up on the raw list, let's look at noise. It's not just about ISO, but if you've got a file that's inflexible, it's already baked in, when you're going to make those adjustments, things are going to start cracking because it's less flexible. Things start falling apart, and you actually will start seeing more noise, more banding, more blocking, all that nasty stuff in your image once you're controlling the exposure, when you're trying to push the white balance, when you're trying to pull the saturation beyond what your file can handle. You're going to get messy and even noisy images, recovering shadows and stuff like that. So definitely, shooting raw is a huge way to improve the noise in your images, regardless of the ISO that you're shooting at. Next up, another little perhaps surprising benefit of shooting raw, I want to talk about sharpness. That's right, again, your JPEG, when it's coming straight out of the camera is doing all this great sharpening so that it looks great on your screen, so that it's perhaps ready to print. But it has made those decisions, and in doing so, it's making little local corrections to local contrast, and then that's kind of baked right in. So with a raw file, again, you have 100% of the flexibility, and you get to choose, because you're looking at the absolute straight off the sensor image, the file. Every single little pixel has not been pushed or pulled any place that it doesn't want to be, any place that wasn't authentic to the scene, and the optics in your lens, and all of that. So when you're editing a raw after the fact in Lightroom or whatever tools you use, you're going to have a lot more flexibility and fine control over sharpening your images for output. Whether that's on the screen for social media or print or whatever, sharpening is another huge benefit of shooting raw. And last up on my list of benefits for shooting raw, I'm talking about local adjustments here. Of course, if you have a JPEG, you can always go in and brush in changes in a certain area. But again, that file is baked in, it's less stretchy, it's less flexible, it's less responsive to what you're asking it to do. So again, with a raw file, you're able to go in and raise the shadows just in that certain area, and because of all the reasons I've already mentioned, those shadows are going to come up a lot easier in terms of their exposure. There's going to be less noise there, regardless of what ISO setting you shot at, or that noise will be so much more controllable. And you can kind of pick and choose where you're going to make edits on an image, and all those raw pixels are there for you, ready to be adjusted. In the sky, you can pull things down. In the shadows, you can pull things up. You can boost the saturation where you want it to be warm. You can cool things off where you want it to be cool. So you can make all those sorts of local adjustments that, again, if you're doing that on a JPEG, you're going to run into areas pretty quickly where you're just overwhelming and trying to you're overstressing the pixels. Don't make them work so hard. Let them come to you in a relaxed state as a raw file. That way they're flexible, they're stretchy, and you get to adjust them however you'd like. So if I was keeping track of the count there, I think I hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different benefits of shooting in RAW. A couple of them were the most obvious for me, exposure and white balance. That's what you hear about all the time. But just the list of benefits is truly almost endless there, and really plays to all the different ways that you could want to work with your images and realize their creative potential on the screen. So I hope that helped you out a little bit, and if you're on the fence at all about shooting RAW, I urge you to check it out. Lightroom is my tool of choice. I know that it's kind of frustrating for some people. It's a subscription model. There are other great options out there. AC/DC is a tool that's been around for ages, and they still have a great kind of pay once and forget about it model. New on the scene as well too has been Luminar. They do an excellent job, almost a complete competitor now for Lightroom plus Photoshop all in one package. Check out Luminar if you get a chance. It's an amazing piece of software, and I think it's going to start taking some market share away from Lightroom too. More thoughts on that in a different video perhaps, but no excuses for not checking out RAW and trying to make the most of your images. Hope that was helpful, and we'll see you on the flip side again. Take care, bye-bye. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that one, please subscribe and hit that bell button. I'd love to see you next time.